144,000, and we dwell on the 144,000. But don't forget, that's not the doctrine. We don't have the doctrine of the 144,000. But we have an explanation. If we are called to explain, we need to provide an intelligent, Bible-based explanation. Bible-based explanation. Now we're starting a new block of prophecy, which is the third one. We started with the seven churches, 2 to 3. We did the seven seals, 4 to 8, 1. Now we're doing the seven shofars, the seven trumpets, the seven vuvuzelas, the seven trumpets, the seven trumpets, seven trumpets. This is 8, 2 up to 11. Possibly 11 verse 18. But let me leave it at 8 to 11. Then we will look at the other block. After this, we will look at the climax. Which is 12 to 14. Then after that, then we'll look at the plagues. Then we'll look at the last block. But for now, I want us to look at this. The trumpets. The Bible is rich. This is a point of departure. The theology of remembrance. Theology of remembrance. Very much rich. Remembrance. It simply says, at some point, God remembers his children. The theology of remembering. And you find quite a I'm discovering things about this. I can actually press it. I need to study it first. The theology of remembrance. And you can get that also from Genesis chapter 19, verse 29. 19 verse 29. Numbers chapter 10, let me see, Numbers chapter 10 verse 9. 10 verse 9. 10 verse 9. Then we will go to, there are several of them, there are several of these verses. The theology of remembrance. It gives the impression that at some point God remembers his children. But to remember has nothing to do with he has forgotten or yet forgotten. This is just a human language. You remember Rachel, you read about the story of Rachel, and God remembered Rachel, and he opened the womb of Rachel. It did not mean, or it doesn't mean that God forgot about her. But I think it simply means at a given point, God will stand up and intervene. But of interest, I want us to look at this chapter, this verse, Numbers chapter 9, Numbers chapter 10, verse 9. Quite interesting. And the reason why I'm referring to this text, it's because it has to do with God remembering. But it is also linked to the shofar, to the trumpet. Numbers chapter 10, verse 9. Anyone who has found that verse?
And if you go to war in your land against the enemy that oppresseth you, then you shall blow an alarm with the trumpets, and you shall be remembered before the Lord your God, and you shall be saved from your enemies.
You blow the trumpet, and the Lord will remember. It appears that the trumpet does something to the Lord, especially against your enemies. Enemies are all out against you, and you blow the trumpet, and God remembers, and then he delivers. Now here's another story. It has to do with remembering, but not necessarily linked to the trumpet. You remember the story in Lot and Abraham, Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. This is quite an interesting story. At some point, the angel said, listen, let's leave. Instructing Lot together with his family. Let's leave this place. And they were actually dragged. You remember the story. I'm not going to get into the dragging of the people being saved against their will. But of interest is chapter 9, is 19 verse 29. When God was destroying the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, he remembered Abraham. Then he saved Lot. There is this thing about him. I don't think it has anything to do with God has forgotten. All of a sudden, hey, now I remember. I don't think it has to do with divine amnesia. This is just a human language that God, at his time, he will stand up and address the situation. So the trumpets are a response to the cry. You remember the souls under the altar. Revelation 6, 9 to 11. There is this cry. How long, how long, how long? And God remembered them. And when he remembered them, God unleashed the trumpets. So the trumpets are a direct response to the cry of the soul, of the symbolic souls under the altar. Symbolic souls under the altar. Now, if you study the Old Testament, you'll discover that the trumpet has a very significant role in the Old Testament. You discover the function within the cultic system. The morning and the evening sacrifices. And also during the atonement, they would blow the trumpets. And sometimes in Israel, there would be a celebration of trumpets. And also the trumpet was used during the time of war. And we read about quite a number of war. Of interest, you remember the walls of Jericho. The walls of Jericho. And the story of Gideon. The story of Gideon in the book of the Judges. The walls of Jericho, remember he caused them to go around, to march around 7 days. And on the seventh day, I'm not sure whether it was the Sabbath or a day during the week, but on the seventh day they marched 7 times. And if you study the geography or the extra biblical literature, you'll discover that it was about 12 kilometers to go around the city. But that time it was 12 times 7. That's 7. And on the seventh lap, after they completed the 7th lap, the priests were instructed to blow the trumpets. And the walls came tumbling down. Gideon fighting against 6 nations. 6 nations. He only had 300 men. You remember even this number was reduced from 10,000. From 10,000 up to 300 men. And they were given torches and trumpets against 6 nations. And the numbers of the 6 nations is not given. The number is not given. But I want to believe...
The sand of the sea.
The sand of the sea.
As the sand of the sea.
Yes. So you don't get to know. And it's time of war, and then they blew the trumpets. Again, the usage of the trumpet during the time of war. And even then, God, in fact, in this story, it is God, whenever the trumpets are blown, God does something. God does something. You know, there are times where I need to blow a vuvuzela when things are not going well. So that God can do something, to do something. Yeah. So they were used during the time of war. They were also used to warn. You get this in the book of Ezekiel. Welcome, this to warn. And also in the context of judgment. And you notice many times it will be judgment against the enemies of God, but salvation for God's people. In fact, whenever there is judgment, just look around judgment, you'll find there is also salvation. And this has been vibrant in the scriptures. Whenever there is a destruction of the world through the flood, just look around, you'll find salvation also. 8 people being saved. You go to Sodom and Gomorrah, there is this destruction by fire. Just look around, then you discover that there are few remnant that are saved. So whenever there is judgment, there is also salvation. But of importance is the usage of the word and also the theology of God remembering. God remembering. And also when there is an inauguration of the king or the sanctuary, they would blow the trumpets. Blow the trumpets. So the trumpets played a significant role in the life of Israel in the Old Testament. Very much significant. Then when you go to the New Testament, trumpets, a trumpet is associated with the second coming. With the second coming. In the book of Revelation, it is associated with punishments. But then the second coming of Jesus Christ, it's joy to some and disaster to some. And I pray that it should be joy to us. We can't give up everything and study theology and work in God's vineyard and not be saved by the same salvation. There's no way, brethren. We need to cry and ask, are my hands clean? Is my heart pure? Am I on the right road? Have I been saved? Are my sins forgiven? It should be our cry. So because it is real that Christ is coming, the trumpet is going to be blown. And we read in the First Thessalonians chapter 4. We read about that last trumpet, the last trumpet. So the trumpet is very much significant in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Still moving together. Are we? Ooh. Now, yes.
The trumpet, therefore, throughout the book of Revelation, it is literal.
Is it literal? That's a good question. Is the word trumpet literal? I was actually discussing the usage. Whenever you see it, it is always associated with punishment and salvation, intervention. But then the question is it literal? Are the angels blowing something that represents something else? But you see, they blow the trumpets and something happened. And whatever happened, it's not symbolic. Chances are, I think it's literal. It's literal. Because a trumpet symbolizes what? We don't have a basis to look at it and say. But we can look at it and say, wherever you find a trumpet, these are the events. When it is blown, God does this. Like we this verse, they blew the trumpet. Oh, there's another verse, chapter Second Chronicles, chapter 13, 14 and 15. 14 and 15, where Judah is attacked. Judah is under attack by other Israelites. For some reasons, it was a civil war. And he is under attack. Behind him, there is an attack. In front of him, there is an attack. And then the priests decided to blow trumpets. And God intervened on their behalf. So you see that pattern. You see that pattern. You see that pattern during and God himself instructing that when you are marching around, the priests on the seventh day must blow the trumpets. You get this. But the question is it symbolic? We don't have a basis to say it's not. It's symbolic. But we can say whenever you see the trumpet, there is something like punishment, intervention, and judgment. Is it symbolic? I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think so.
How do we know when to take it symbolic and when not take it symbolic?
Following the same principles, we look at the context. Look at the context. We look at the larger context, the immediate context. Then we determine, when we look at the larger context, we check as to where it was used. Was it symbolic or literal? In the immediate context, is it symbolic? Like when I say is it symbolic? Whenever it is symbolic, like you'll get the sea. Then elsewhere, the sea that you saw is actually people. Or the 7 stars. The 7 stars are 7 lampstands are. You look for such clues. And in the absence of that, you say, could it be that it's literal? Then you say, if it's symbolic, what does it symbolize? In the absence of self-interpretation. Then you look at the context and you say, does it make sense if you interpret it in the symbolic fashion? If you say, yes, it makes sense, then what does it symbolize? I don't know if it makes sense. But your question is very much important because there are places where it is literal. Like when we deal with the earthquakes. You remember when we're the sixth seal. The earthquakes, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Especially in chapter 6 of Revelation. You remember the falling of stars. In other contexts, the stars represent something else.
That's right.
But when you come to this, you apply the same principles. Were these the falling of stars, as in stars falling, or is this the falling of the angels? But then you look at the context. You look at the historical context. Do you have a biblical prophecy where the angels will fall just before Christ? The answer is no. So the symbolic interpretation within this context will not apply. But then you go to the literal. If the sun is actually literal, then it makes sense to interpret the stars as the stars, as the literal stars, the falling of stars. And look at the historical context if there was any fulfillment within history to back this information. Does it make sense?
Yes.
The book of Revelation, it's tricky. So one should keep within those. What were we doing? Why did we get into this? Before we got here, where were we?
Trumpets.
And then literal of
Second
Well, that's
calling.
wine.
Who asked that question? AJ, what have you done to us? Okay, I think we have covered this part, we have covered this part.
Spoken about Jericho, how
Jericho, this.
trumpets symbolize victory.
Okay,
And I used in the context of war.
context, okay, great. Now I want us to move towards the book itself now. I want you to watch something between the seals, the 7 seals. There is between the 7 seals and 7 trumpets. You'll notice that there is somehow a parallelism. A parallelism. I'm going to use these 2 signs as parallelism. You find this the parallelism. Now I want you to watch this. First, in the 7 seals, you see a pattern. 4 seals, 4 first seals are actually horses. 4 horses, ne? And then the last 3 are different, are not horses. Let me put it that way. The last 3 are not horses. The last 3, the souls under the altar. Then you have that prophecy number 6, seal number 6, where you have history and future. History, the falling of stars, earthquakes, sun darkening, the moon. Then future, you have the second coming of Christ. You have that, you have past plus future. Okay? Then you have silence in heaven. You have silence in heaven. But these are the 3 last seals. Now, this side, the 7, the first 4 trumpets, trumpets, you notice that they are grouped together. The first 4 are grouped together. But then the last 3 are actually called the woos. Are called the woos. So you find this pattern. The first 4 seals, the first 4 trumpets, the last 3 seals, the last 3 woos. Okay? Also something else. In between the 6th and the 7th seals, there is this interlude, which is found in Revelation chapter 7. Revelation chapter 7. The emphasis is the sealing. Is the sealing. People are sealed. Now, this side, there is an interlude again between the 6th and the 7th seal, the 7th trumpet. And also, it's an interlude. We'll press it. Maybe it's intended to be pressed. Interlude. But that interlude, it's found in Revelation 10 and 11. You find the remnant. I'm going to use the word the remnant, although the word remnant is not found in chapter 10. But I'm going to use the word remnant, which are represented by John. John himself, the remnant. Then this is in chapter 10. Then in chapter 11, there is a measuring of people. There is a measuring of people. But you see,
Judgment.
this measuring is actually judgment. It's actually judgment. Now, in the Old Testament, during the maybe not only judgment, but this is in the context of atonement, Old Testament atonement. During the time of atonement, there would be the measuring of priests. That is in the Old Testament. Of priests, 1, 2 of the people, 3 of the tabernacle itself. of the tabernacle itself. This is in the Old Testament now. But in the book of Revelation, chapter 11, you find the measuring of the people and the measuring of the temple. But you don't find the measuring of the priests. Are we together? There is that variation. Simply because Christ himself is the priest, is the high priest. Christ is the high priest. Christ does not need to be measured. He's the high priest. But in the Old Testament, the priest also needed to be measured. You find that. You find this, the interlude. Are we still moving together? We are, ne? Sure. We are moving together. Ne? Anyone who's lost? Are we in the bush? We are still in the open field. Ne? Okay. But you are not responding. You're saying, you are following. I'll take it that you are following by faith. Ne? Okay. The first one, the first four are related. The second, the last three, okay, there is an interlude. The last three are parallel. There is this interlude, and there is also emphasis. There is sealing in chapter 7. There is measuring in chapter. But in terms of sequence of events, sealing is preceded by measuring. The measured are sealed. Are we together? You are not sealed when you have not been measured. You need to be declared righteous before you are sealed. In terms of the sequence, are we together? Can we wipe here? Don't forget, brothers, this is not our money, it's God's money. 3. I think we've done. Maybe let's put it this way: 1, 2, 3, because this is a point on its own. The 3 parallel to the 3 rules. Are we together? Then the interlude. Then the 4th one would be the seventh seal. It's also parallel to the 7th trumpet. With the 7th trumpet, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of God. This side there is silence in heaven. There is silence in heaven. Silence. And by the silence we believe that it according to what we believe as Adventists and informed by the writings of Ellen White, that the silence refers to the second coming of Christ. Second coming of Christ. And we want to believe that it is parallel to the kingdoms have become the kingdom of God. And also it's an allusion to Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, where the big stone becomes God's kingdom. It's an allusion to chapter 2, the second coming. So you have this parallel. This is 4. Now 5, which is the last one, 5. I want you to pay attention. We're moving together, ne?
Yes.
Okay. 5. The historical context. Historical context. Historical context would be where in history do we locate the trumpets? Are we together? When I say, are you together? I want you to respond and say yes or no. It's a serious question. The historical context. With the seals, I think with the seals, let me put it this side, okay. With the seals, I think we are aware I think we dealt with that, the historical context. You remember? And especially chapter 5 of the book of Revelation. Chapter 5.
Yeah.
The description of Christ gives a clue as to the historical context. He appears as a lamb, wounded. And that points to the cross. Are we together? That points to the cross. So it gives us the context that the seals are post the cross. After the event has just taken place. But the way it is portrayed in Revelation chapter 5, it appears that John has just seen the lamb that is oozing blood. So the cross would be the context. From the cross up to the second coming. Up to the second coming. Up to the second coming. Are we moving together? Now, when coming to the seals, to the seven trumpets, if we read Revelation chapter 8, from verses 2 to verses 5, we read about an angel. Here's this angel standing in front of the golden altar. This angel is standing in front of the golden altar, and they are having an incense. Now, in the Old Testament, holding an incense in the old cultic, in the ceremonial system, once the angel is at that point, it gives us the impression that, that is second phase. That is second phase. When you see the golden altar of incense, it gives us the impression that this is the second phase. What would be the first phase? The altar plus the sacrifice. That this, where he's standing, gives us the impression that I've done the first part. The first part has taken place.
Yeah.
So this is the second phase. Are we together? So even that gives us the context that this has taken place. It's parallel to Revelation chapter 5, where the lamb is already slaughtered. Are we together? Already slaughtered. So the same would be from the cross up to the second coming. Up to the second coming. Are we still moving together? So the historical context of the seals, the seven seals and the seven trumpets are the same, are parallel. This is what we've been progression and recapitulation. You remember those terms? Starting in the past, moving to the future. But with the seals, a different information is given. With the trumpets, a different information is given. Now, can I remove this part? Again.
I've just a question first.
You have a question before we?
Yeah, you said now, okay, the second phase was the golden incense.
Yes.
Okay, but that is where the trumpets actually start in chapter 8.
Yes.
But how can that then be the same historical context? Because it's a different phase. It's not the cross. It can't start from the cross. It is most now at the altar of incense that it's starting.
Oh, the point is, it's after the cross. It's
After the cross.
Yeah. That's why with the seals I said, the lamb appears to have been slain already. Spazzled, slain, past. The angel is standing on the second phase. It's past. It's past already. I'm using the word past already. But with the trumpets, we know because of different emphasis,
Yeah.
that the trumpet would be that period. But the implementation would differ in terms of the fulfillment of the trumpets. But I'm just saying this is post-cross. Both of them post-cross.
I'm with you.
You're fine, thanks. have the weakness of having a watch and not checking time, which is not good. It's not good for the pulpit. Ne?
Yeah.
Not good for the pulpit. Now, you notice the prophecies of Revelation, together with Daniel, they have a point of departure, and they move towards the future, towards an event, which we believe is the second coming. But the emphasis, if the seven churches, the emphasis would be different. Again with the seals, the emphasis would be different. The seven seals, the emphasis, even in other places, even the dating of events are different. Sometimes there would be events this side which may not necessarily be linked to the events this side. For instance, when we deal with the trumpets, the seven trumpets. The events that take place, like we believe that the first trumpet, we will come to the first trumpet, points to the punishment of the Jews. And that punishment, we believe, took place around AD 70. The destruction of the temple. You know the destruction of the temple. And this destruction of the temple, if you notice in Daniel chapter 9, there is a prophecy about this. Mm-hmm. That after the cross, there will be a destruction of the temple. Mm-hmm. Destruction of the temple. We found a destruction after the cross. After that 7 days, 3.5 and 3.5. You remember that 3.5 and 3.5? Mm-hmm. After the middle of the week. The middle of the week would be the cross. But after this event, after this week, the temple will be destroyed. We get this prophecy, and it is fulfilled in future during the New Testament by the book of John. You get that. You get that. But the point I'm trying to make, the events may be different, because you remember in recapitulation, repeating the same information but adding new details. With the trumpets, we talk about it's the punishments, or maybe the judgments also. The judgments. We have 5 minutes. We can use that 5 minutes. Perfect. See, can I wipe this side? I hope that you have agreed. If you haven't, man, it's too bad. I've wiped it. I can't unwipe it.
Undo.
Okay. So there is this. The prophecy does not. The prophecy follows a sequence. There is this sequential, and we get that from the seals, from the trumpets, and also we look into history at the fulfillment of prophecies. We find that sequence, recapitulation and progression. Okay? Okay. We're done with that. Now, why do we have the trumpets in the book of Revelation? I think I've already alluded to the answer. The punishments or the judgments. The judgments are giving us comfort and joy to know that although we may not see, God responds even in the history. There are judgments, there are punishments that he has inflicted, sometimes to his children, sometimes to the enemies of God's children, even within the context of history, prior to the second coming of Christ. But those judgments are intended to be redemptive. The purpose of the trumpets are intended to be redemptive. Are we together? They are not as opposed to punitive. Now, if they are intended to be redemptive, in other words, God expects the recipients of the trumpets or the judgments to repent.
Now,
Repent.
with such millions of Jews killed, how can they repent with the destruction of Jerusalem if it's not punitive?
If you study every punishment, you will notice that it's not worldwide. Sometimes it's the 1/3 was affected. 1/3 was affected. Not everyone was affected. And the question is, those that were affected, if they died,
They couldn't repent.
there would not be a chance for them to repent. But I think we should leave those matters with God. It might be that
They were past.
they
were past the repentance stage.
because the character of God forbids us to think that God can punish people or even judge people who have a potential to come back to Him. If there is a spark of hope, heaven waits. Heaven waits. And unfortunately, you keep on reading. Even though they saw these things, they refused to repent. Especially when you deal with the trumpets. Then you discover something. The aim is to be redemptive. But people do not respond positively. Despite the fact they've seen these distractions. But the aim is to be redemptive. And because of that, you discover that we are serving a God who's all out to save. To save not only those that are righteous, but to save sinners. To save. If God is so loving to sinners, then there is a hope for the weak righteous. If this is how God deals with His enemies, the enemies of His children. Anyway, they are His children too. It says that saints, enemies of God's children, especially those that punish and persecute them, are also God's children. Must be a dilemma for God. I saw a hand somewhere.
Pastor, sorry. I agree fully it's redemptive, but isn't there some punitive aspects also to it?
Oh yeah, they are intended to be punishments. They are intended, let's not forget, God is saying, I will answer the prayers, but in answering prayers of the cry of the symbolic souls under the altar, I will respond to that, but at the same time I will be redemptive. I will answer the prayer, but I will also, like the story, you remember we mentioned the story somewhere there, where Lot, the story of Lot, where Lot refuses to leave. And if he refuses to leave, and he says, look, I want to exercise my choice, I don't want to go. If it means dying with the people of Sodom, let it be. And then the angels say among each other, you know, he has a right to die. He has a right not to be saved. But Abraham has a right to be remembered. What do? Do we respect choice or do we remember prayer? And the angels look at themselves and say, they go and they say, Lord, what do we do? This guy wants to remain and we want to save him. And that guy prayed. And we promised that we'll answer the prayer. And maybe God said, well, save him and answer the prayer. We don't want to discourage the saints, the saint who prayed. This one, we will not save him because of him, but we will save him because of that one. That is salvation by grace, not salvation by obedience.
Yeah.
Salvation by grace. And I want to suggest to you that when grace is at work,
Yeah.
sometimes human choices are ignored, but prayers are answered.
Like Lot's
Heather.
wife.
Lot's wife.
Lot's wife.
What about Lot's wife?
Yeah, she was saved, but then she.
Yeah, she was saved against her will. But then she said, hey, listen, you saved me, but I still want to go back. Now at that point, I think at some point grace says, I've done what I could. I've rescued you, but I can't rescue your heart. I can take you out of Sodom, but I can't take Sodom out of you.
Yeah.
But God is love, brothers. We are serving a loving God. We're serving a loving God. Let's pray together. It's already time for the bishop will not be happy with us.